Welcome back to the Psychedelic Mom Podcast. If you've been following along, you know that one of the things that I'm really passionate about is you having your own medicine bag. I want for you and humanity to have earth medicines and psychedelics free for you to use in the ways that you feel would most benefit you, your family, and your community. Do you know at one point these medicines were legal? They were free to be used. So there's a deep suppression of these powerful tools going on. We're going to be asking the question, why today, and what we can do about it. I'm here with Charles Eisenstein and Robert Forte. Unfortunately, at some point during our conversation, Robert Forte's connection went bad. He's in Greece and he drops out. But Charles and I continue this really important conversation about earth medicines and psychedelics and what they can teach us and how we can potentially move forward in a way of self sovereignty and having the right and the beauty to have these medicines. So, if you haven't listened to my episode with Charles Eisenstein, it's episode number 2. I've had him before. He is a repeat guest. I've gotten to know Charles personally. And besides reading his books, including The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, Climate, A New Story, Sacred Economics, Charles also launched a new program called the Sanity Project, which is a forum holding space for the growth of sanity in these turbulent times. Charles has always stood out there as a radical and a radical to against perhaps the current systems that aren't working, a current way of doing things that everything, including earth medicines, gets funneled through. A power over dynamic, a great Western industrial war economic complex. And Charles is ringing the bell that potentially there's another way that not only can we relate to ourselves, each other, but also maybe another way to govern ourselves. He's currently involved in Robert Kennedy's campaign, trying his best to get this lens as part of the political landscape. The message that he brings through his books is not that different than the message that earth medicines and psychedelics impart to us, that we're not separate, that we're interbeings, and that it's a reminder of the truth of who we are, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that potentially the way that we relate and govern ourselves could come from that foundation instead of what it does come from. And Robert Forte is also a repeat guest here. If you haven't listened to my first episode with Robert, he is absolutely fascinating, also an author who has authored many books. It's episode number 60, and we dive into whether John F. Kennedy did psilocybin in the White House, the history of psychedelics, his deep dive and study into the Eleusinian mysteries, ceremony in Greece that was done once a year that people traveled from all over to partake in, where a medicine, ergot, was given and people would have a psychedelic experience and they were sworn to secrecy. But what we do know is that people left those ceremonies saying that they were some of the most important wisdom tools that they've received in their life. And due to the secrecy of these ceremonies, we don't have many reportings, but many of the great minds like Socrates and Plato came out of that time. And we also know that women were the ones initiating the men in those ceremonies, that women served the medicine, priestesses. That medicine was said to leave people with no fear of death anymore. Robert is such a kind, generous soul, and I'm happy to have him back here today for the time that he is on to share the history of psychedelics. He was someone who, back in the day when Timothy Leary was around, knew Timothy Leary well, worked with Stan Grof, knew the greats in the psychedelic space back in the 60s. He also was a distributor of MDMA globally where it was legal. He definitely has some opinions that we talk about in our first episode of MAPS and the current way in which psychedelics are being rolled out in the United States. And again, you know that I feel that there's potentially another way in which to have earth medicines and psychedelics become medicines that we all get to use freely. So dive into this conversation and let me know what you think, how you think that these earth medicines and psychedelics could be rolled out in a safe and effective way where we all have the ability to use them. Maybe there are some different models. If you have an idea, reach out and let me know. Also, let me know the content that you're enjoying. And if you have a story of using psychedelics and earth medicines, that they have helped you biologically, psychologically, or spiritually, reach out. I'd love to share your story.
Welcome here today, Robert Forte. You are back. Charles, welcome back as well. I think I interviewed you about a year and a half ago. It's so good to see you both today.
Happy to be here, Michaela, and good to see you, Robert.
Likewise, it is really great to see you guys. I want to thank you guys both for showing up in my life. I've loved every minute of it. The friendship's very important to me. Michaela, watching your podcast, and Charles, keeping up with you and your writing and the important work you're doing for our country. It's very admirable, and I'm glad to witness it and maybe contribute if I can.
I know both of you have felt that psychedelics have really impacted your lives, and psychedelic renaissance has been a really exciting time, but a lot of twists and turns at the moment. And kind of want to talk about some of the ways in which you feel in the current state where the FDA just rejected MDMA because it said that the clinical trials didn't really prove efficacy. And yet at the same time, we all know that for generations, we've known that these medicines have been incredibly useful tools for consciousness and healing. And in the United States, I know all three of us are really dedicated to freedom of speech, individual sovereignty. I'm curious to hear from both your perspectives how psychedelics have positively impacted your life, and why have psychedelics been suppressed for so long and now continue to be suppressed?
Let's just start with what you said at the beginning, that the FDA rejected MDMA therapy. And I want to make a correction there, because the way I see it, they didn't really reject MDMA therapy. What they rejected was that specific application from Rick Doblin's MAPS Lycos. And they rejected it because there were a number of flaws in it. And so I see this really, I know a lot of people in the psychedelic space are saying this is a setback, but I see that it's really a important pivotal moment. There's so much publicity these days about psychedelics. There's so much awareness in the popular press and in science of their very unique and profound therapeutic virtues. And we have to ask the question, why have these virtues been squandered for decades? I mean, there's a lot of press about how wonderful they are now. Honestly, nothing is new. We've known this ever since they burst on the scene in the United States and Europe 50, 60 years ago. So that's the question that we want to ask. What's behind this? What has been the problem? Now, frequently, they'll say the narrative of this that guides this renaissance is that Timothy Leary was the problem, that the United States had to make these drugs illegal because Timothy Leary popularized them excessively. I see that story repeated a lot, and it really is not true, and there's a lot more there. But that would be the first thing to look at, is what's the underlying policy that causes the therapeutic virtues of these drugs to be squandered? And I'll just leave it at there, and let's hear from Charles.
Maybe I'll start just with a very, very brief answer to your question about how they impacted my life. My psychedelic journey began with a very, very powerful LSD experience when I was 22 years old that confirmed an inarticulate suspicion that reality was a lot bigger than what I had been told, and that who I was a lot vaster and a lot smaller than who I had been told. And it completely dislodged me from any vestigial desire to participate fully in the system, to live the life that was prescribed to me. It, in a sense, turned me into a radical, or confirmed my radical tendencies, and not just political radicalism, but a wholesale rejection of the dominant mythology of our civilization. And since then, I've been piecing together a different mythology that includes, countenances all of the things that were shown to me through that and other psychedelic journeys. So that, in a nutshell, is also why these medicines have been suppressed. They dislodge people from the governing story of our culture. They are revolutionary in that sense. And that's why people come up with all kinds of pretexts to suppress them. My view of the latest FDA advisory panel's recommendation is that it's just another in a long line of concocted excuses to withhold these medicines from the public. In this case, they went after it because they critiqued the study because they didn't maintain the double blinding of the study. I mean, once you've had one session, you know if you've received genuine MDMA or a sugar pill. It's fundamentally impervious to blinding. You cannot blind it. You cannot run a study according to normal protocols. And in fact, the FDA participated in the design of the study that they then rejected, or the advisory panel rejected, for its design. So, there's something really fishy going on there. There's something else at work. It's almost an instinctual fear of anything that's going to be truly disruptive. It goes a lot deeper than disrupting the profits of the pharmaceutical industry or something like that. It's really disrupting a set of paradigms. It's disrupting an entire belief system and disrupting a social system and a state of consciousness that goes along with it.
Charles, I totally agree with you. And what you just mentioned about the first time you took LSD, one of the things where you and I were different is probably that I took psychedelics later on in life. But as soon as I did, all these kinds of ideas that you're talking about started to really come into my own consciousness about sovereignty and freedom in these systems, and the way that we have been kept away from these tools. And as you said, you cannot take a sugar pill and think that you have taken MDMA. It's just absolutely not possible. So this underlying reason for holding psychedelics and earth medicines from humanity being, as you said, greater than preventing pharmaceutical companies from getting money. In my dream world, I have my own medicine bag. And in my own medicine bag, I have the tools of mushrooms, of LSD, of whatever I want for my own consciousness, for my family. Is that ever a potential thing that could happen in the United States?
Not only do I believe that it's a potential, but it was a past. Now, if we look at the modern history of psychedelic drugs, and I've dove into this subject as much as anybody, probably. For me, I was in my third year of college. I'm 67 years old. I grew up in the 60s. And I have to say, first, I was very frightened by what I saw, these drugs coming into my community. It wasn't until my third year of college, after I'd taken an interest in meditation, that really changed my life, that I became curious about the history of religion. And how did ancient people figure out these psychotechnologies and these metaphysical systems that were so profound and being reiterated by, modern physics? How did they derive this insight into consciousness and reality? And it turns out that among the very earliest insights into these dimensions were psychedelic drug induced. And I had a professor at Columbia who pointed that out, and like a light went off in my head, like, wow. All these years, I thought these drugs were trivial and insignificant and deranged people, but actually there's this very profound historical significance. And so it became like a calling for me to really devote the rest of my academic career, my life as a student and then a graduate student in the history of religion, to understanding what was the story like. Why are they illegal? Why have they been squandered? And so I want to focus our attention on the policy, on the 1970 Controlled Substance Act, because that is why you can't do what you would like to do, Michaela, which is actually your constitutional right. I mean, here we are, or here you guys are anyway, living in a country that is basically founded on the principle of freedom of religion, that Congress can make no law to interfere with the individual's access to their religious experience. And now here are these whole family of psychedelic drugs, which, all scholars and historians of religion agree are profoundly significant in the genesis of the religious experience among Homo sapiens. And yet we're forbidden to use them in the United States. That's the problem. How did that law come to be? And what can be done to undo it so we can go back to our constitutional government, where these drugs are not controlled by a medical system or by a police system, because both of those are completely dysfunctional. When they're controlled by a medical system, they have to be proven for their therapeutic efficacy in methodological practices that are completely impertinent, don't work for psychedelic drugs, as Charles has pointed out. This double-blind scientific methodology may be good for some drugs, but in the area of psychedelics, we're not really talking about the pharmacological effect of a drug so much as we are talking about a whole experience and access into another realm that is the important thing. And that's not the province of medicine, it's not the province of police, it's the province of philosophers, religious scholars, and really any responsible adult. That's what that country is based on.
Charles, what are your thoughts on the potential of me having my own medicine bag and how we get there?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Robert said. Once you try to confine the utility of psychedelic medicines to their effectiveness in reducing symptoms within some diagnostic category from the DSM-5, then you've already neutralized a lot of their potency. If you're trying to prove within our current system that they are beneficial and that these benefits have to be quantified, because you cannot actually make something into a scientific study without quantifying the effects, then you limit our understanding of their power to the quantities that they can affect. Even if it's self-reporting or observational studies, self-reporting of various symptoms or something like that. But how do you quantify a religious experience? And how do you even value that in a system that relies on data? There are dimensions to these sacred medicines that are intensely personal and that therefore have to be in the realm of inalienable rights and not justified by some kind of cost-benefit analysis that quantifies the harms and quantifies the benefits. It's a fundamental right because we are ensouled beings having a sacred experience here on earth. And if you do not recognize that, then you're going to run into all kinds of restrictions that limit precisely that utility of psychedelic medicines. Pragmatically speaking, a step forward to allow the therapeutic use by credentialed practitioners of psychedelics, but it's not really where we want to go. And that can lead to so many horrible cul-de-sacs where the medicines get corporatized and, instead of being kept away from people based on legal grounds, then it becomes medical grounds. What they're trying to do, they're like, okay, we can't keep them away from people entirely. So let's control them. Let's try to contain them within the current system. It's almost like let's limit their effect to change consciousness, narrow it down to treating PTSD. There's one more thing, though. Sometimes I wonder if maybe the illegality of these medicines has in a way, protected them from the mass marketing and the debasement that is happening with cannabis right now. In a traditional setting, the use of psychedelics was usually contained within some kind of ritual, which sets off the psychedelic space as separate and distinct from the rest of life. It's in a non-normal realm. There's an entry ritual even to enter into the psychedelic arena. Because we don't have legal structures to contain and prescribe how the medicines are to be used, people are faced with the necessity of creating their own structures. For one thing, just to stay safe. You don't want to be thinking that the cops are going to show up. So you have to go somewhere safe, somewhere private, somewhere, in a sense, secret or sacred. Actually, secret and sacred have the same root. So you have to set it aside in a way that's very careful, that's very deliberate. And that mindset of attentiveness, of care, of deliberateness, that is what ceremony is. Ceremony always has an element of precision. There's part of me that trusts a much larger intelligence that's guiding all of this. You know, your medicine bag, whether or not these are legalized, you actually, in fact, do have your medicine bag. And you had to go through special procedures to obtain these medicines. You couldn't just go to Walmart and get them. You had to have special connections. You had to develop relationships of trust with these connections. You have to investigate the source of these medicines. I think all of that is good. And I'm a little worried about what happens when they become another mass-marketed consumer product.
The thing that we're all coming up against is the desire for access to some of the most profound tools on the planet in a way that can support raising consciousness, that can support having the capacity to have the vision for creating a different world with different systems, because I think that's the very nature of what they can do. Potentially, they could do something completely different. You said, Charles, that it radicalized you. Do they always radicalize us in a way that is best for humanity? Is 100% legalization model bad for society? If my goal is to, at some point, have every human being that wanted to, any mother that wanted to, any father that wanted to have the sovereign right to have a medicine bag and to not go to jail, is it decriminalization? Is this the best model? Or what are your thoughts on that?
You know, some years ago, I began a project that I called Toward a Reclassification of the Psychedelic Drugs. Right now, because of the Controlled Substance Act, they're in these categories of schedules: medical use, abuse potential. There's only one exemption for sacraments, and that belongs to the Native American Church use of peyote. But if all of the psychedelic drugs were reclassified as sacraments, then I think we could begin to make progress toward some of these goals that we have and some of the problems that we're citing, like commodification and corporatization. You know, when something is a sacrament, you don't charge for it. In the realm of religion, there are different principles than in the realm of capitalistic business. We need to begin to recognize that these experiences that people have with psychedelics often are among the most profound, intimate experiences of their lives. You know, people compare them to like the birth of their child or the most intimate kind of love affair with their beloved or death. It's these kinds of experiences. We don't market those things. Like, you don't go around and, you know, set up advertisements for like what great sex you have with your husband or wife. There's a very natural aura and ambiance of secrecy and respect. It's kind of gross, really, to sell sexuality. To me, anyway, when I first got involved in the study of religion and took part in meditation retreats, you know, the meditation retreats that were the best were ones that were based on the Buddhist principle of dana, which is based on the idea that the Dharma is free. You want to come here and sit and watch your mind according to our systems, that's fine. Give us a donation, but you don't advertise, and this whole like proliferation of New Ageism that's trying to market the sacred is really kind of gross. Of course, there's some exchange, but the advertising, the seduction, the inducement into psychedelic mysticism, and we ought to pull back from that. I was agreeing with what Charles was saying before about this, that when they're illegal, there's a kind of protection there. Like in the first part of my career, it was a secret society. That was what you did. You used code words. You didn't just tell anybody what you were doing. You kind of selected people that you could trust, that you felt were ready. And if you look at the history of religion and the history of the use of these substances, in many cases, they were sort of more illegal than they are now. People talk about the Eleusinian mysteries, for example. It's becoming a popular topic that I devoted 2 of my 3 books to. You know, in ancient Greece, the psychedelic realm was so sacred, and so you weren't even allowed to talk about it. It was the most important thing in a person's life. And for 1,500 years or so, that was the case. People had such respect and such awe of these realms that they were secret. We shouldn't be locked into this playing field of the Controlled Substance Act. We need to devise a new category. And as I said before, I think that category has already been established by the US Constitution, that we have a right to privacy. We have a right to these realms to explore ourselves. There's plenty of other laws that exist in the world for whatever, public drunkenness or whatever problems might occur. This is where I think we should focus our attention if we're going to talk about this in a kind of legislative or policy way, is that we shouldn't keep calling them drugs. We should really refer to them as sacraments and revive the principles that we have in our government to protect sacraments.
Yeah, I really resonate with the idea of sacraments, and also with Robert's observation that there's something like a little gross or a little off key, maybe I would say, about subjecting the sacred to commerce. I wrote a book back in the day called Sacred Economics. And one of the things that it explores is alternative business models that are based on gift. And I practice those when I hold retreats and things like that. I don't do so much that anymore, but occasionally I still hold a retreat. And usually the way I do it is that people have to pay for room and board, which might just go to the retreat center directly or through me to the retreat center. But the program fee, that is totally up to the participant. Could be $0, could be $1,000, could be whatever. There's practical reasons why I do it that way, so that those who can't otherwise afford it can come, and those who are affluent can cover those who are not, and so forth. There's like practical ways, but it also cordons it off from the normalized mindset of commerce, where everything gets reduced to its value, and it's a quantified value. It's a value denominated in money. So it creates a bubble around it that makes the experience more special. It defines it as not part of this. This is something else. I also advise people who are opening a psychedelic center. You can have beautiful accommodations. You can charge for room and board, but the medicine is by gift. And your business model is that you receive donations from people who are so grateful for what you have offered that they're not paying for it. They are supporting this sacred work in the world, just like you'd give to a church. It's not like you go and, wow, that was an incredible sermon. How much do I owe you for that? It's supposed to be more, wow, that was really moving. It moves me to generosity. I believe in you. I want to support this work. It's not like, oh, that sermon was worth $50. So about the secret lineages and the way that the medicines were held in ancient Greek times, because in the 1960s, these secret lineages blossomed into mass consciousness. And this was made possible through I mean, if you look at Hoffman, I mean, it was made possible through chemistry and the methods of chemistry that you can provide a formula and a procedure to create these medicines, and through the mechanisms of mass distribution, through the industrial age. The industrial age made it possible for the sacraments to propagate on an industrial scale. So I think that there is actually a movement of consciousness here that goes back tens of thousands of years that visionaries and mystics have predicted, which is that there will come a day when the general consciousness is ready for that which has been secret to enter into mass consciousness and become no longer secret, but become the new order. That we will sacralize all of human interaction and reorder society along the principles of that which has been kept safe for so long. Because I don't think that these medicines are for a select few. I always admired Timothy Leary and resonated with his basic impulse of let's make this available to everybody, even if it's going to be kind of messy. So I think that just pure legalization would be much better. One idea I had is, what if you just make them legal, but prohibit their sale? You can give them away. I mean, I kind of wish that had happened with cannabis, which used to be, back in the day, very much the subject of gift economy. People would pass the joint around. People would give away marijuana all the time. It's in the nature of the herb that it grows so prolifically, so abundantly. It's like it wants to give itself away. It doesn't want to be bought and sold. And when it is bought and sold, it starts to get resentful. And the character of the medicine now is actually harming people because it's been mistreated. It's no longer the kind bud, the kind herb. It's been abused so much that it's not that it's trying to harm us, but that it's unable to be what it is supposed to be. I mean, it's confined, it's grown indoors. I mean, they're doing all kinds of terrible things to the sacred being. That wouldn't happen if it had not become a huge for-profit business. And so I am indeed worried about what will happen if legalization means that this becomes another huge for-profit business. It's just that I haven't thought it through a whole lot, but I like the idea of it is illegal to buy and sell. It is illegal to sell the medicines. You have to think of other ways. I mean, the people who serve the medicine, if they are doing it with integrity, if they're doing it well, they deserve honor and patronage. They should not have to engage in marketing. They should not have to engage in financial negotiations about it. That's not where we want them to spend their attention and their energy. So yeah, I'm just going to put that out there without having thought it through too much, although it has occurred to me in the past. And it's a very strong gut level resonance that make them fully legal, but make their sale illegal.
So, unfortunately, this is where Robert Forte drops off. And I will definitely be inviting Robert back to continue this important conversation. He was speaking here about the role of the Drug Enforcement Administration and how psychedelics and earth medicines became under their dominion, and why scheduling earth medicines as Schedule 1 drugs is really not the place for these sacred medicines, and how maybe we can disentangle the DEA from being the ones who are determining whether these medicines are Schedule 1 or Schedule 3, or potentially there may even be, as we discuss, a new classification for these medicines. Robert proposes a new classification of earth medicines and psychedelics as sacred medicines. And so we're going to continue this juicy conversation because I believe that this could potentially be the best path for earth medicines and psychedelics.
Making these medicines sacred, how do we do that? And I like the idea of legalization 100% versus the pharmaceutical current model as well. Charles, you're working on Kennedy's campaign. He's come out in favor of some kind of model, I don't know, for psychedelics. Are you in agreement for is what he is trying to do with psychedelics?
The first step is to deschedule psychedelic medicines, take them off Schedule 1 anyway. That's the policy that I'm familiar with. What I've run up against, and not just in this area, but a lot of areas, is that the ideal policy, in the ideal world, might be such a large leap from where we are right now that the bureaucratic mechanisms and the legal mechanisms simply don't exist for it. So really what I'm looking for is what is the next step in that direction that is doable from where we are right now. And I'm not sure exactly what that is. Like, I'm not actually an expert on the regulations and all that. But Bobby, he's very much aware of the potential of these medicines. One of his children, his life was transformed sitting with ayahuasca. He's well aware that these are just profound gifts to humanity. I'm not sure how that awareness will filter into changes in government policy once he's in office. Once you get in office, you're sitting atop an enormous bureaucracy, and you're dealing with Congress, and entrenched interests at the FDA, and then you have to appoint new people, and then there's pushback from the middle ranks, and there's a lot of institutional inertia. I can say confidently that he has a pretty good understanding of the potential of psychedelics, and especially compared to SSRIs. I mean, even if you do limit it to measurable outcomes that fit inside existing psychiatric paradigms, even limited to that, they are still dramatically better than SSRIs and antipsychotics and drugs like that. How that understanding gets translated into policy, I think that we have conversations or debates or struggles in the future to steer that understanding toward a democratization and a sacralization of the substances rather than regulation and corporatization. So there are a few ways that occur to me to undo it. One would be to overturn the Controlled Substances Act. Another would be to restaff the DEA with people who have different opinions about this. Another would be through, the DEA can declare things illegal, but they don't mandate what the sentences are, whether or not these cases are prosecuted. So that would be another avenue of change, in really practical terms. If we have a chief executive who wants to change this, the easiest would be simply to instruct the DEA to deschedule all of these and, fill the DEA with people who are willing to carry out that instruction. I think that on a more esoteric level, it begins to affect the medicines themselves. You turn someone on to psychedelics, and maybe they become more compassionate, maybe they become more expansive, maybe it changes their life in a really good way. But I've also seen it feed a kind of grandiosity and megalomania in a lot of people. And if it has that potential, then boy, it could be used for manipulative cults and to generate religious hysterias or mind control. I mean, this is not science fiction. This isn't just about psychedelics. It's about religion itself. And it's about the contact with larger bodies of knowledge, larger bodies of information that maybe if you're not, quote, ready for them, have the potential for abuse. This is also true in technology. There are technologies now that the government is keeping secret, generally for reasons of maintaining their own power. On some level, the fact that these dark agencies are even doing that reflects an unreadiness by the collective to have these technologies fully available. I'm talking about stuff like free energy devices, anti-gravity devices, stuff like that. Are we ready to use them responsibly? And if we are not, then maybe the deep state is doing us a favor by suppressing them.
One of the things that's interesting that you're talking about is the readiness for humanity, right? Because it's almost this paradox that in some ways psychedelics could provide the rise of consciousness for a readiness. I mean, each of us have experienced our own process of evolution with psychedelics, a deeper understanding of who we are, consciousness, this world, to the degree that we have. And then at the same time, you're hitting on the readiness in general. So take cannabis, one of the models we've talked about, how that was rolled out. They say you can't be addicted to cannabis. I certainly know a lot of people that misuse cannabis, that it isn't seen as a sacred medicine. It's so bizarre because you have these medicines that could truly, in the right ways, really move humanity in a different way. My personal opinion would be like, well, psychedelics could really move us in that direction if we can do it in a way that respects the medicines themselves. I think they have an intelligence themselves. But you said something too, Charles, that there is a higher intelligence at play in general here that I don't have the answers to, the timing of things. There's two models. One would be legalize psychedelics and bring free energy out and anti-gravity machines and see how we do. But because we do have a system that centralizes everything, capitalizes on everything, and there are power structures that aren't equal power structures of the individual here, individual sovereignty, it's hard to know what is a way forward.
Yeah, and luckily we don't have to come up with all the answers here in this time together. And I think it's good to end with questions and not tidy answers. It's much better to acknowledge that you don't know than to pretend that you know. Honestly, I don't know exactly what the next step should be in government policy around this, but I resonate with what has been said here about the direction that it should go toward sacrament, toward medicine. Like sacrament and medicine are the paradigms that most fit my experience with psychedelics, and including the understanding that sacraments and medicines can be abused, just as they are in religious cults. This is the real deal here. This is the real shit,
Yep. Right.
These are not toys.
No.
They're not harmless. They come with a lot of responsibility. And is that responsibility to be outsourced to the government that has abused and suppressed humanity for so long? I don't think so.
It does seem like there is a rise in consciousness. Are you seeing that in the political landscape?
Not so much on the outward level, but I've noticed that a lot of the tone and messaging that I'm trying to bring into the campaign really does resonate with people. All of the messages that resonate the most, it's heal the divide. Yeah. People are sick of this pattern of, you see a problem in society, find someone to blame. And so we end up with an increasingly polarized society, each side blaming each other. That's never the deepest truth. Psychedelics have contributed to this growing understanding of that which we blame contains something of ourselves or mirrors something of ourselves. And that the solutions to our problems have to reach for a deeper unity and will not come simply by overcoming those bad guys that we blame for it. I use the Buddhist term interbeing, an understanding of our interdependence with each other, of our existential dependence on each other, that we're not really separate. And that is creeping into mass consciousness.
The interbeingness, the interconnectedness of all of life, the causes and conditions of how we were all connected, and really about that we are all one.
It is seeping up from below. And ultimately it will change the political culture.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming here today and having this conversation. We'll continue it and wishing many blessings on your path of what you're doing in the world. Thank you for expanding the consciousness in the arena that you are.
Yeah, thanks.